Hello, members, one and all of the Salivation Nation. Well, Thursday is the big day, and suspiciously, there's been not a lot of talk about this in the gold and silver community, the precious metals community here on YouTube. And, makes you wonder, well, what's going on? Does it really matter who the Fed chair is? And it's the news is going to be coming out Thursday, where Trump will make his announcement. And but I'm going to take a look at an article here by The Hill, which I think is quite interesting about Fed Chair candidate Taylor, who, by the way, from what I understand, is probably not going to be chosen, but he is a front runner in the short list, and was 5 in that short list originally, but it's been narrowed down even further by speculators in the markets as to what or who is going to be it. So with news about that the contest for Fed chair is now essentially down to him and frontrunner Jerome Powell, John Taylor's views have received intense criticism. The third degree is welcome since candidates for important policy positions ought to be vetted thoroughly. But in portraying Taylor as an unyielding hawk whose near mechanical insistence upon his eponymous rule would plunge the economy back into recession, Taylor's critics aren't merely questioning Taylor's beliefs, they are torturing them. When all of Taylor's views are considered, he does not deserve the reputation as someone who dogmatically attached to a rule raising interest rates. In 1993 paper, Taylor introduced an analysis for Fed policy that became known as the Taylor Rule. According to that rule, the Fed would keep the economy on an even keel by adjusting its policy interest rate according to a simple formula, the main elements of which are the difference or gap between the actual rate of inflation and the Fed's desired rate, and that between the actual economic output and the Fed's estimate of output when the economy is at full employment. When both gaps are positive, the formula calls for a tightening monetary policy. When both are negative, it calls for loosening. When one gap is negative and the other positive, the bigger gap holds sway. The Taylor rule seemed appealing not just to Taylor himself, but to many economists, because it describes fairly well that the Fed has been what the Fed has been doing, deliberately or not, during the Great Moderation, a remarkable stretch of low inflation and subdued business cycles that ran roughly from the mid-1980s to around 2007. Even the Fed itself was impressed, although the FOMC never followed the rule strictly, and Taylor judged that body harshly for some of the deviations. It did use the rule as a reference point in its deliberations. Thus, ironically, is where much of today's criticism of Taylor comes from. If one plugs recent inflation and output gap numbers to the standard Taylor rule, one finds that the rule calls for a raising of the policy rate much more aggressively than what the Fed's present plans call for. But this arithmetic neither completely represents Taylor's policy position, nor does it prove he'd be a Fed chair that would only follow a rigid rule. So it's quite interesting. The article kind of goes on here and talks about it, but I tend to agree with that sentiment that more than likely he would not follow that stringent rule as Fed chair if it were to come into place. Certainly would guide him probably much more than it has in the past, but it's obviously he's the head of the board of governors there, and will probably be swayed by certain sectors of the economy, certain regions. There's 12 federal chair people of their different regions around the country, and each region has different economic factors and pushes and pulls on what goes on. Plus, there's a psychological aspects and uncontrollable things as well. Nonetheless, with that being said, there's that little tidbit with that, and then the Fed chair position of who will be the next Fed chair when Trump makes his announcement. There's speculating that he could be leaning towards 2 out of the 5 previously named candidates for the position of Federal Reserve Chair when current Fed Chair Janet Yellen's term expires in February of next year. And so then it is down to these 5 candidates, and I really don't know a whole lot about any of these people, but many people are saying that it could be Jerome Powell. Apparently, Gary Cohen is out of the running. Powell, Taylor Yellen, and National Economic Council Director Gary Cohen, but I understand that he is out, and former Fed Governor Kevin Warsh. So I'm going to go with Jerome Powell in this vote because that seems to be the consensus. And but look at the survey that most people think that Janet Yellen will be reappointed. And Trump has mentioned that some talk that he is still considering Janet Yellen. But I've heard this and that maybe she's not in the running. And but apparently most people think that he's going to keep her on. That would be interesting considering that she comes from as Ben Bernanke's deputy from that more of that Keynesian side economically, and obviously she probably supported all those quantitative easing and money printing and the like, but so who knows what it will be, but quite interesting indeed to see how things will pull out. This little choice here is kind of interesting. Trump should do it himself. I don't know if that's if that's just a joke or what have you, but I would almost be in favor of that, to be honest with you. But I don't know how realistic or how legal or constitutional that will be. I don't know. But anyways, post your thoughts below. And of course, all of this comes into play to see how the markets will react, if at all, and or how precious metals will react. Prices, as far as part of the market with this type of thing. Usually when the Fed acts, the precious metals markets act as well. So post your thoughts below on this news and and who do you think the next Federal Reserve Chair will be? I'd like to extend the multitude of gratitude to y'all for watching and encourage you to please rate, comment, and subscribe.